Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Rowan Blackwood and I am 24 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for only 8 months. This happened during the fall of 2002, when the missing person case of Iris Caldwell turned into something that still haunts me. I was still new to the job, still eager to prove myself worthy of the badge and the trust that came with protecting over 900,000 acres of Washington wilderness. The other rangers treated me with polite professionalism, but I could feel their skepticism. I was young, inexperienced, and desperate to show them I belonged here among the towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars of the Olympic Peninsula. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late October. The fog hung thick between the trees like wet wool, and the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight. I was checking trail conditions on the Hoh River Trail when my radio crackled to life. "Blackwood, this is dispatch. We've got a missing person report, 24 hours overdue." I pressed the transmit button with fingers already stiff from the cold. "Copy, dispatch. Details?" Iris Caldwell, 19 years old, college student from Seattle. Last seen Sunday afternoon at the Salduke Trailhead. Was supposed to check in with her roommate yesterday evening. Never showed. My stomach tightened. 24 hours in October wilderness was serious. The nights were getting longer, darker, and the weather could turn deadly without warning. Was she experienced? Unknown. She was alone, carrying photography equipment, registered for a 3-day backcountry permit. Alone. The word echoed in my mind as I hiked back toward the ranger station. In my 8 months here, I'd learned that the Olympic wilderness didn't forgive mistakes. The temperate rainforest was deceptively beautiful, but it could swallow people whole. Dense canopies blocked GPS signals, trails disappeared under fallen logs, and the maze of old-growth forest could disorient even experienced hikers. By the time I reached the station, Supervisor Martinez had already assigned me to lead the search. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. This was my first major case, my chance to prove I could handle the job. "Caldwell's car is still at the Salduke parking area," Martinez told me, spreading topographic maps across the briefing table. Her permit indicated she planned to camp at Salduke Falls the first night, then move deeper into the backcountry. I studied the map, noting the web of trails that branched out from Salduke. The area was vast, with countless places someone could get lost or injured. "Any other hikers report seeing her?" "Negative. Off-season, so the trails are pretty empty." Martinez looked at me with the expression I'd come to recognize. The one that said he was giving me a chance but wasn't entirely confident in my abilities. "Take Henderson with you. Start at the trailhead and work your way in. Check the established camping areas first." Ranger Henderson was a 15-year veteran with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't say much as we loaded our packs with emergency medical supplies, ropes, and survival gear. The weight of the equipment reminded me of my training, but this felt different. This was real. The Salduke Trailhead was eerily quiet when we arrived. Iris's blue Honda Civic sat alone in the gravel lot, coated with morning dew. We found her registration form in the permit box, neat handwriting, local address, emergency contact listed as her roommate. The normalcy of it made my chest tight. "Photography student," Henderson noted, reading over my shoulder. "Probably got distracted by a shot, wandered off trail." We began our search at the trailhead, looking for any sign of Iris's passage. The trail was well maintained for the first mile, winding through second-growth forest toward the falls. But even here, the wilderness felt oppressive. The canopy was so thick that it seemed like twilight at noon, and the only sounds were our footsteps on the damp earth and the distant rush of water. Henderson had me practice reading sign as we hiked. "There," he said, pointing to a depression in the mud beside the trail. "Boot print. Size looks about right for a young woman." I knelt to examine it, feeling proud when I spotted the distinctive tread pattern. "Vibram sole, hiking boots." "Good. Now tell me what else you see." I studied the print more carefully. It was clear, well-defined, pointing toward the falls. But something nagged at me. The depth is consistent. She wasn't favoring 1 foot or carrying an unusual load. Meaning? No signs of injury or distress when she made this print. Henderson nodded approvingly. Keep looking. We found more prints along the trail, all heading toward Salduke Falls. The roar of water grew louder as we climbed, and soon we could see the white cascade plunging into the pool below. The falls were stunning, easily worth the hike for a photography student, but Iris wasn't there. We circled the falls area, checking every established camping spot. I found disturbed ground near the viewing area, several boot prints, some overlapping. Henderson crouched beside me, his face grim. Multiple people have been here recently, he said. Look at this. He pointed to a print that was partially obscured by others. The tread was different, deeper, heavier. A man's boot, probably size 11 or 12. And there was something else. A partial print that looked like it had been made by someone moving quickly, the toe digging deeper than the heel. Someone was running, I said. Henderson's jaw tightened. Or chasing. We expanded our search, following game trails and checking every possible camping spot within a 2-mile radius. The afternoon wore on, and the fog began to thicken. By 4 o'clock, it was already getting dark under the canopy. That's when I found the backpack. It was hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, maybe 50 yards from the established trail. The bright red fabric was what caught my eye. Too saturated, too perfect to be natural. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman's pack, small and lightweight. Henderson, I called. Over here. He crashed through the underbrush, breathing hard. When he saw the pack, his face went pale. That's not good. Why would someone hang their pack that high? Bear cache, he said. Standard practice. Keep food away from animals. But his voice was uncertain. Problem is, there's no campsite here. No water source, no flat ground. I looked around, noting the steep slope and thick undergrowth. No one would choose this spot to camp. So why was the pack here? Henderson keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Henderson. We found what appears to be the missing person's backpack, requesting additional units. Copy. Location? Henderson gave our coordinates, then looked at me. We don't touch anything until the investigators get here, but we can look. I circled the tree, trying to understand what I was seeing. The pack was suspended by a rope that had been thrown over the branch. Professional technique, clean knots. But something felt wrong. The pack was too clean, too carefully positioned. Henderson, I said slowly, look at the ground. He followed my gaze. The area around the tree was disturbed, but not in the way you'd expect from someone setting up a bear cache. The soil was churned up, leaves scattered, and there were more of those heavy boot prints circling the base of the tree. Jesus, Henderson whispered. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze. A human voice, faint and desperate, calling for help. Did you hear that? I grabbed Henderson's arm. He nodded, already moving toward the sound. This way. We crashed through the undergrowth, following the voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the trees. The terrain grew steeper, rockier. My boots slipped on wet leaves and branches caught at my uniform. Help me. The voice was clearer now, definitely female. Please. We found her in a small clearing, maybe 100 yards from where we'd discovered the pack. Iris Caldwell was alive, but barely. She was sitting against a fallen log, her face pale with shock and cold. Her clothes were torn, and I could see scratches on her arms and face. Thank God, I breathed, rushing toward her. Iris, I'm Ranger Blackwood. You're safe now. She looked up at me with eyes that were too wide, too frightened. He said you'd come. He said you'd find me. Henderson was already on his radio, calling for medical evacuation. I knelt beside Iris, checking her for injuries. She was dehydrated and hypothermic, but conscious and alert. Who said we'd find you? I asked gently. The man, The one who... She shuddered. He had my pack. He hung it up like bait. My blood turned to ice. What man? He used to work here. He told me he used to be a ranger, but they fired him. He's been watching me since I arrived. Henderson finished his radio call and joined us. Medical team is en route. ETA 20 minutes. He looked at Iris. Can you tell us what happened? She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. I was photographing the falls when he approached me. Said he was a ranger, offered to show me some hidden spots for better shots. I thought he was trying to help. Where has he been keeping you? A cave. Maybe half a mile from here. He said he was going to hunt me like an animal. Said it would be more fun if I had a chance to run. Her voice broke. He let me go this morning. Told me to hide. Said the new ranger would come looking and he wanted to see how good you were. The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue. It was a trap. And I had walked right into it. Henderson's face was grim. We need to get out of here now. He tried his radio again, but got only static. Damn, something's wrong with the radio. I checked mine. Same thing. Nothing but white noise. That's not possible. We were just talking to dispatch. Signal jammer, Henderson said. Military equipment. Our guy knows what he's doing. The forest around us seemed to press closer, the shadows deeper. Every sound made me jump. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves. Somewhere out there, a predator was watching us. Can you walk? I asked Iris. She nodded, though her legs shook when she stood. I think so. We began moving back toward the trail, Henderson leading, me helping Iris, both of us scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Every tree looked the same, every shadow could hide a threat. That's when I realized we were lost. Henderson, I said quietly, do you know where we are? He stopped, looking around with growing concern. We should have hit the trail by now. I checked my GPS unit. The screen showed our position as a blinking dot in the middle of nowhere. No trails, no landmarks, no way to orient ourselves. GPS is scrambled too. He's hurting us, Henderson said, pushing us deeper into the wilderness. The sound came from behind us, a branch snapping under a heavy footstep. We spun around, but saw nothing except fog and trees. Then another sound to our left, then our right. He's circling us, I whispered. Henderson unslung his rifle, a weathered .30-06 that looked like it had seen decades of use. Stay close. We move as a unit. We began walking again, faster now, with Iris between us. The sounds followed, always just out of sight, always keeping pace. I could feel eyes watching us, calculating, waiting. There, Iris whispered, pointing ahead. The cave is that way. No, Henderson said firmly. We don't go toward his base. We find high ground, defensible position. But as we tried to change direction, the sounds grew closer, more aggressive. Branches crashed to our left, driving us back toward the path Iris had indicated. Every attempt to deviate was met with noise, movement, the feeling of being watched. He's not going to let us go any other way, I realized. Henderson's face was tight with anger and fear. Then we make a stand. Here. No. The voice came from the fog ahead of us, calm and conversational. I don't think so. A figure emerged from the mist, tall, lean, wearing worn camouflage and carrying a compound bow. His face was weathered, with pale eyes that seemed to see everything. He looked like he belonged in the wilderness, like he'd been born from it. Ranger Blackwood, he said, and his voice was almost friendly. You're everything they said you were. Young, eager, completely out of your depth. Henderson raised his rifle, but the man smiled. I wouldn't do that, Dale. Yes, I know who you are. 15 years on the job, 3 commendations, clean record. But your reaction time isn't what it used to be. The arrow took Henderson in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled but stayed on his feet, trying to bring his rifle to bear. The second arrow caught him in the chest. "Henderson!" I screamed, reaching for him as he fell. "Run!" he gasped. "Take the girl and run." I grabbed Iris's hand and we fled into the fog, crashing through undergrowth, slipping on wet leaves. Behind us, I heard the man's laughter, calm and amused. Good. Yes, that's what I want. Run, little ranger. Show me what they taught you in training. We ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, roots catching our feet. I had no idea where we were going, only that we had to get away. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "This way," Iris gasped, pulling me toward a cluster of large boulders. "There's a way through." We squeezed between the rocks, emerging into a small clearing. I checked my radio again, still nothing but static. My GPS was useless. We were completely cut off. "Who is he?" I whispered. He said his name was Marcus Voss. Said he worked here for 12 years before they kicked him out for being too aggressive with trespassers. The name hit me like a slap. I'd heard the stories, whispered conversations among the senior rangers about the man who'd been fired 3 years ago for excessive force. He'd been found beating a poacher with a nightstick, claiming the man had threatened him. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of violence and paranoia. "They said he disappeared into the wilderness," I said. "Never found him. He's been living out here," Iris said. "Watching people, learning their patterns. He said I was the third." The third? The words made my stomach turn. How many people had vanished in these woods over the past 3 years? How many had been written off as accidents, exposure, getting lost? A sound made us both freeze, the soft whistle of an arrow passing overhead. Then another embedding itself in a tree trunk inches from my head. "He's found us," I breathed. "This is fun." Voss's voice drifted through the fog. "But I'm getting bored. Time to end this." I looked around desperately. The clearing was surrounded by dense forest, no clear escape route. The boulders at our back rose 20 feet into the air, too steep to climb quickly, too exposed. "Can you climb?" I asked Iris. She looked at the rocks, then nodded. "I think so." "Go. Get as high as you can. I'll try to distract him." "What about you?" "I'll figure something out." She started climbing, her movements slow and careful. I drew my sidearm, a .40 caliber Glock that felt inadequate against an opponent who knew these woods better than I knew my own backyard. "Come on, Voss," I called out. "You want to play games? Let's play." His laughter echoed off the rocks. "You think that pop gun is going to save you? Little girl ranger with her little girl gun?" I moved to the far side of the clearing, trying to draw his attention away from Iris. "I know about the others, the hikers who disappeared. You've been hunting people for sport." "Hunting?" He sounded genuinely offended. "This isn't hunting, this is evolution, survival of the fittest. The weak ones die, the strong ones, well, they usually die too, but they make it interesting." I saw movement in the trees, a shadow shifting between the trunks. I fired 2 shots in that direction, the reports echoing through the forest. No cry of pain, no crash of a falling body. "You missed." His voice came from a different direction now. "But you're learning. That's good. I like prey that learns." I spun toward the sound, but he was already moving again. He was using the fog and the trees like a cloak, appearing and disappearing at will. This was his territory, his hunting ground. I was just another animal stumbling through his maze. Above me, I could hear Iris climbing, her breathing harsh with effort. She was maybe 15 feet up now, but still exposed. "If Voss got a clear shot, you know what I like about you, Blackwood." His voice was closer now, maybe 30 feet away. "You're not giving up. The others, they always gave up, started crying, begging, but you're still fighting." I backed against the rocks, trying to keep the entire clearing in view. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can. Because out here I'm the law. I'm the predator at the top of the food chain." There was pride in his voice, satisfaction. The Park Service didn't understand that. They thought I was being too rough with the tourists, too aggressive. But this wilderness doesn't respect weakness. It only respects strength. I caught a glimpse of movement to my left, a flash of camouflage between two trees. I fired again, and this time I heard him grunt. Hit, but not down. "Now you're making me angry," he said, and the friendliness was gone from his voice. I was going to make this quick. An arrow whistled past my ear, so close I felt the fletching brush my hair. I dove sideways, rolling behind a fallen log. Another arrow thudded into the wood inches from my head. "Iris," I called. "How much higher can you go?" "Not much," she called back. "There's a ledge up here, but it's narrow. Get on it and stay down." I heard her scrambling higher, dislodging small rocks that clattered down the cliff face. At least she was getting out of the line of fire. The fog was beginning to thin as the afternoon wore on, which meant better visibility, but also less cover. I could see farther into the trees now, but so could Voss. This was turning into a waiting game, and he held all the advantages. "You know what your problem is, Blackwood?" His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You're thinking like a ranger, following procedures, trying to do everything by the book, but the book doesn't have a chapter on this." He was right. My training had covered search and rescue, medical emergencies, even wildlife encounters. But nothing had prepared me for this. A human predator who knew the wilderness better than I did, who had been planning this encounter for days or weeks. "I studied you," he continued. "Watched your patrols, learned your patterns. You're methodical, predictable. Always follow the same routes, always check the same spots. It made it easy to stay ahead of you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. He'd been watching me for weeks, learning my habits, my weaknesses. This wasn't random, it was personal. "You set this up," I said. "The missing girl, the backpack, you arranged all of it." "Very good. Yes, I took young Iris here to draw you out. I wanted to see what the new ranger was made of. I wanted to test you." "And Henderson?" "Collateral damage. He wasn't supposed to be here, but I adapted. I always adapt." I could feel rage building in my chest, hot and clean. Henderson was a good man, a dedicated ranger who'd spent his career protecting people, and Voss had killed him like he was nothing. "You're insane," I said. "Am I? Or am I just more evolved than you are? I've learned to see the wilderness for what it really is, not some pristine playground for weekend warriors, but a killing ground where only the strong survive." I heard a sound behind me, the scrape of boot on rock. He was moving, trying to get a better angle. I turned, bringing my weapon up, but he was already gone. "The thing about you young rangers," he said, his voice coming from a new direction, "is that you think technology will save you. GPS, radios, emergency beacons. But out here in the real wilderness, all that stuff is just dead weight." It was true. My GPS was useless, my radio silent. I was down to whatever I could carry and whatever I could remember from training, and my training felt increasingly inadequate against an opponent who made his own rules. "How many?" I asked. "How many people have you killed?" "Does it matter? They were weak. They didn't deserve to survive." Henderson wasn't weak. "No," he admitted. Henderson was a warrior. But he was old, slow. His time was over. I could see him now, moving between the trees like a shadow. He was circling me, looking for the perfect shot. I had maybe 3 rounds left in my magazine, and no spare ammunition. "Last chance, Blackwood," he called. "Drop your weapon and I'll make it quick. Keep fighting and I'll make it last." I thought about my options. I could surrender, hope he'd keep his word. But I'd seen what he'd done to Iris, heard the fear in her voice. He wasn't going to let either of us walk away from this. "Go to hell," I said. His laughter was like breaking glass. "I was hoping you'd say that." The arrow came from an impossible angle, arcing over the fallen log to catch me in the shoulder. The impact spun me around, and I felt the broadhead tear through muscle and scrape against bone. My gun went flying, disappearing into the undergrowth. "Now we're getting somewhere," Voss said, emerging from the trees. He had another arrow nocked and ready. But you're not done yet. I can see it in your eyes, you're still fighting. I pressed my back against the rocks, trying to stop the bleeding. The arrow had gone completely through my shoulder, the point protruding from my back. Every movement sent fire through my arm. You want to know the truth about this place? Voss continued, walking closer. The truth about wilderness? It's not about preservation or protection. It's about dominance. The strong take what they want. The weak feed the soil. Above us, I could hear Iris whimpering. She was trapped on the ledge, unable to climb higher, unable to come down without exposing herself. Don't worry about her, Voss said, noticing my upward glance. She's next, but first I want to finish with you. He raised the bow, drawing the string back to his cheek. At this range, he couldn't miss. I closed my eyes, thinking about Henderson, about all the people I'd failed to protect. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the small clearing. Voss stumbled, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. He turned, and I saw Henderson standing at the edge of the clearing, blood streaming down his face but his rifle steady in his hands. You missed something, Marcus, Henderson said, his voice weak but determined. The book does have a chapter on this. It's called Backup Always Comes. Voss tried to raise his bow, but Henderson fired again. This time, the former ranger went down and stayed down. Henderson stumbled over to me, his face gray with blood loss. You okay, kid? I'll live, I said, though the arrow in my shoulder said otherwise. How did you find us? Followed the blood trail. My blood. He managed a weak smile. Turns out getting shot makes you pretty easy to track. Above us, Iris was crying with relief. Is it over? Is he dead? Henderson knelt beside Voss, checking for a pulse. Yeah, it's over. The medical team found us just as the sun was setting. They had to cut the arrow out of my shoulder, and I spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from blood loss and shock. Henderson was there longer. The arrow had punctured his lung, and he needed surgery to repair the damage. Iris recovered physically, but the psychological scars ran deep. She transferred to a school on the East Coast as far from the wilderness as she could get. I don't blame her. The investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of Voss's activities. They found his camp, a sophisticated setup with cached supplies, surveillance equipment, and trophies from his victims. 7 people had disappeared in the Olympic wilderness over the past 3 years. Only 3 bodies were ever found. I stayed on as a ranger, but everything changed after that night. The wilderness I'd once seen as a place of beauty and challenge had revealed its darker nature. I learned that the most dangerous predator in any forest isn't the bear or the cougar. It's the human who's decided that civilization no longer applies to them. I still patrol the same trails, still help lost hikers and injured climbers. But I'm different now. More careful, more suspicious. I know that somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, there might be another Marcus Voss, another predator who's learned to use the isolation and beauty of the wild places as camouflage for their cruelty. The official report listed Marcus Voss as a deranged individual, an isolated case of a disturbed former employee. But I know better. I know that the wilderness doesn't create monsters. It just gives them a place to hide. And on the dark fall nights, when the fog rolls in thick between the trees and the forest goes quiet in that unnatural way, I remember that the most terrifying hunting call isn't the scream of a cougar or the howl of a wolf. It's the sound of human laughter echoing through the trees. My name is Rowan Ash, and I am 26 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 months. This happened during the fall of 2017, when the missing person case of Rowan Blackwood turned into something that still haunts me. I was still new to the job, only 8 months in, when the call came through on that cold October evening. The radio crackled to life at 4:47 p.m., just as the autumn darkness was beginning to swallow the towering Douglas firs and Sitka spruces that made Olympic's temperate rainforest feel like another world entirely. Ranger Ash, we have a missing person report. 23-year-old female, Rowan Blackwood, failed to return from a research hike on the Hoh River Trail. Last seen yesterday morning at 0800 hours near the trailhead. Over. I keyed the radio with fingers that trembled slightly, not from cold but from the familiar spike of adrenaline that came with these calls. 8 months on the job, and I'd already learned that missing person cases in Olympic could go very wrong, very fast. The park's nearly 1 million acres of wilderness contained some of the most unforgiving terrain in the continental United States, where even experienced hikers could vanish without a trace. Copy that, dispatch. Do we have a description and last known location? Over. Affirmative. Winona Blackwood, graduate student from University of Washington, researching old-growth forest ecosystems. 5'6", brown hair, athletic build. Vehicle still parked at Hoh River Trailhead. Supposed to return yesterday evening. Her advisor called it in when she missed a scheduled check-in. Weather's been clear, but fog's rolling in tonight. Over. I pulled on my rain jacket and checked my gear. GPS, radio, medical kit, flashlight, backup batteries, emergency blanket, and the Glock 22 that I'd hoped never to use in the field. The weight of it on my hip felt heavier than usual as I headed toward my patrol vehicle. The drive to the Hoh River Trailhead took 45 minutes through increasingly dense forest. By the time I arrived, the fog had begun to creep between the massive trunks like ghostly fingers, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet. The parking area was nearly empty except for a silver Honda Civic that must have belonged to Winona. I approached the vehicle with my flashlight beam dancing across the windows. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, nothing obviously out of place. The car was locked, but I could see a water bottle and some research papers scattered across the passenger seat. Normal stuff for a grad student. The trailhead information board displayed the usual warnings about wilderness safety, but in the gathering darkness, the cheerful illustrations of proper hiking techniques seemed almost mocking. I shouldered my pack and started down the trail, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog like a knife through gauze. The Hoh River Trail was one of the park's most popular routes, a relatively easy hike that wound through the heart of the temperate rainforest. During the day, it was magical. Cathedral-like spaces between ancient trees, moss covered everything, the constant whisper of the river nearby. At night, with fog rolling in, it became something else entirely. I followed the trail for about 2 miles, calling Winona's name every few minutes and listening for any response. The fog seemed to swallow my voice, and the only sounds that came back were the drip of condensation from the canopy above and the distant rush of the Hoh River. My radio crackled occasionally with static, but the thick forest and fog were interfering with the signal. That's when I found the first sign. About 3 miles in, just past a massive fallen cedar that created a natural bridge across a small creek, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. There, pressed into the soft mud beside the trail, was a clear boot print. But it wasn't just any boot print, it was a hiking boot, women's size, probably around 7 or 8. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp despite the dampness. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I knelt to examine it more closely. The print was pointing away from the trail, toward the deeper forest where no official path existed. And beside it, barely visible in the mud, were drag marks. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Ash. I've found signs of the missing person approximately 3 miles up the Hoh River Trail. Requesting backup and possibly SAR team. Over." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting my position and holding the radio higher. More static. The fog was getting thicker, and I could feel the temperature dropping. My breath began to mist in the beam of my flashlight. I should have turned back, should have hiked out to where I could get a clear radio signal and call for proper search and rescue support. That's what my training told me to do. But Winona Blackwood had been out here for over 30 hours now. If she was injured, if she was trapped somewhere, every minute counted. And I was still new enough to the job that I felt I had something to prove. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Martinez, had been patient with my learning curve, but I knew he was watching to see if I had what it took for this work. I made a decision that I would regret for the rest of my life. I followed the drag marks into the forest. The undergrowth was thick with ferns and devil's club, their thorny stems catching at my uniform as I pushed through. The drag marks were intermittent but clear enough to follow. Disturbed earth, broken twigs, the occasional scuff mark on a fallen log. Someone had definitely been pulled this way, and recently. After about a quarter-mile of slow progress through the underbrush, I found myself in a small clearing surrounded by towering old-growth trees. The fog was even thicker here, creating an almost claustrophobic sense of isolation. My flashlight beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet before being absorbed by the gray-white wall of mist. That's when I heard it. A low moan, barely audible, coming from somewhere ahead of me. Human. Definitely human, and filled with pain. "Winona," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Winona, is that you?" The moan came again, and I followed the sound to a massive cedar tree whose trunk was easily 8 feet in diameter. As I rounded the tree, my flashlight beam fell on something that made my stomach lurch. There was a shallow depression in the forest floor, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. And in that depression, covered by a thin layer of branches and moss, was a person. A woman, brown hair matted with mud and leaves, her hiking clothes torn and dirty. Her eyes were closed, but I could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, dropping to my knees beside her. "Winona? Winona, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open and I saw they were brown, wide with terror and confusion. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then barely a whisper. "Help. Me." I immediately began checking her for injuries. No obvious broken bones, but she was hypothermic, her skin pale and cold to the touch. There were scratches on her arms and face, and what looked like rope burns around her wrists. Someone had tied her up. "You're going to be okay," I told her, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "I'm Ranger Ash. I'm going to get you out of here." I pulled the emergency blanket from my pack and wrapped it around her, then tried my radio again. Still nothing but static. The fog seemed to be getting even thicker, if that was possible, and I was starting to lose track of which direction I'd come from. Winona's grip on my arm was surprisingly strong for someone in her condition. He's still out there," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's watching." "Who? Who's watching?" "The man. The ranger. But not like you. Something wrong with him. He caught me on the trail, said he was going to help me find something. Then She shuddered, and I could see the fear in her eyes was deeper than just exposure and injury. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. What did he look like? Tall, older, dark hair, beard, ranger uniform but old, faded, and his eyes. She gripped my arm tighter. His eyes were wrong, like he was enjoying it. I helped her sit up, keeping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, and I helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, leaning heavily on me, but she could move. I shouldered my pack and started back toward where I thought the trail should be, supporting most of her weight. That's when I realized I was completely lost. The fog had become so thick that I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. Every tree looked the same, every patch of undergrowth identical. I'd been so focused on following the drag marks that I hadn't been paying attention to landmarks, hadn't been leaving any kind of trail markers. We stumbled through the forest for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Winona was getting weaker, and I could feel panic starting to set in. This was exactly the kind of rookie mistake that could get us both killed. I should have stayed on the trail, should have gone back for help, should have followed protocol instead of trying to play hero. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. Footsteps. Deliberate, measured footsteps moving through the underbrush nearby. I immediately switched off my flashlight and pulled Winona down behind a fallen log. In the sudden darkness, the fog seemed to glow with an eerie luminescence, and the footsteps sounded impossibly loud. "He's found us," Winona whispered, her voice barely audible. "He always finds them." "Them?" But before she could answer, a voice called out through the fog. A man's voice, friendly and concerned. "Hello? I heard voices. Is someone out there? Are you lost? The voice was coming from maybe 50 feet away, moving slowly in our direction. I started to stand up. After all, if it was another ranger, we needed help. But Wynona's grip on my arm stopped me. That's him, she hissed. That's the voice. The friendly tone continued. I'm Ranger Kane. I'm here to help. I know these woods better than anyone. Just call out and I'll come to you. Kane. I knew that name from somewhere, but I couldn't place it. What I did know was that something was very wrong with this situation. Real rangers didn't wander around in the fog at night without proper equipment, without radio contact, without backup. I know you're out there, the voice continued, and now there was something different in the tone, something that made my skin crawl. I can smell your fear. Sweet little Wynona led me right to you, didn't you, sweetheart? My hand went to my service weapon, and I quietly unsnapped the holster. 8 months of training kicked in as I tried to think through the situation tactically. Unknown subject, possibly armed, definitely dangerous. Injured civilian to protect. No radio contact, no backup, no clear escape route. The footsteps stopped, and the forest went completely silent except for the constant drip of condensation from the canopy. Even that seemed muffled by the fog. I know you're new, the voice said. Conversational now. 8 months, right? Still learning the ropes, still trying to prove yourself? My blood turned to ice. How could he know that? Oh, I know all about you, Rowan Ash. 26 years old, graduated from the Ranger Academy last spring. Parents think you're wasting your degree in environmental science. Still live alone in that little cabin on the Hurricane Ridge Road. No girlfriend, no close friends. Nobody who'd miss you if you just disappeared. The voice was moving again, circling us. I tried to track it, but the fog made it impossible to pinpoint the direction. You want to know how I know all this? Because I've been watching, waiting, planning. You new rangers, you're all the same. So eager to prove yourselves, so willing to bend the rules to take risks, so easy to manipulate. I remembered where I'd heard the name Kane. There had been a briefing during my training about former park employees who'd been terminated for various reasons. Ezra Kane had been a ranger here for 15 years before being fired for increasingly erratic behavior and violations of park regulations. That was about 3 years ago. You set this up, I whispered to Wynona. You were bait. She nodded miserably. He told me he was conducting research about researcher safety protocols. Said he needed to test how quickly rangers would respond to a missing person call. I thought it was legitimate until what? Until I saw the others. The footsteps stopped again, and Kane's voice came from directly behind us. Found you. I spun around, weapon drawn, but there was nothing there except fog and trees. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. You can't hide from me in my own forest. Kane's voice drifted from somewhere to our left now. I know every tree, every trail, every hiding spot. I've been living out here for 3 years, and I know things about this place that aren't in any of your pretty little guidebooks. A branch snapped somewhere in the fog, and I spun toward the sound. Nothing. 3 years of watching hikers come and go. 3 years of studying their patterns, their weaknesses. 3 years of perfecting my technique. Another sound, this time from our right. I was losing track of where he was, and I was starting to panic. This was exactly what he wanted, to disorient us, to make us afraid, to turn us into prey. The first one was an accident, Kane continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A day hiker who got too close to my camp. But then I realized how easy it was, how perfect this place was for hunting. Miles from civilization, thick forest, dozens of places to hide a body where it would never be found. You're sick, I called out, hoping to draw him into the open. You need help. Laughter echoed through the fog. Help? I found my help, Ranger Ash. I found my purpose. Do you know what it's like to spend 15 years protecting these woods only to be thrown out like trash because some bureaucrat decided I was mentally unfit for duty? Do you know what it's like to have your entire life's work taken away because you finally understood what this place really is? What is it? I asked, trying to keep him talking while I figured out our next move. A hunting ground. The perfect hunting ground. And humans are the perfect prey. They're smart enough to be challenging, but not smart enough to survive. They follow predictable patterns. They carry supplies. They trust authority figures. They're everything deer and elk are not. I heard Winona stifle a sob beside me. Her grip on my arm was getting weaker, and I could feel her shivering despite the emergency blanket. You've killed people, I said. 17 over the past 3 years. Hikers, researchers, photographers. All carefully selected, all made to look like accidents. The Park Service has such a good reputation for search and rescue that nobody questions it when someone goes missing. They just assume it was a tragic accident. 17 people. I felt sick. And now you're going to be number 18, Ranger Ash. But first, you're going to suffer. You're going to know what it feels like to be hunted by something smarter than you. Something that knows these woods better than you ever will. You're going to experience true fear before you die. The fog seemed to shift, and I caught a glimpse of movement about 20 feet away. A tall figure in what looked like an old ranger uniform, but I couldn't make out any details before it disappeared again. Run, I whispered to Winona. When I say go, run straight ahead and don't look back. I can't leave you. You have to. Find the trail, get to the parking area, get help. I took a deep breath and stood up, weapon raised. Kane, I know you're out there. Show yourself. Silence. Then, from directly behind me, boo. I spun around, finger on the trigger, but there was nothing there. Just fog and darkness and the feeling that I was being watched from every direction at once. Go, I shouted to Winona, and she stumbled away into the fog. I heard Kane laugh, and then the sound of pursuit, not coming after me but following her. I ran in the direction she'd gone, crashing through the underbrush, my flashlight beam swinging wildly through the fog. I found her about 50 yards away, backed up against a massive cedar tree. And standing in front of her, finally visible in my flashlight beam, was Ezra Kane. He was tall, probably 6'2", with a heavy build that spoke of years of outdoor work. His hair was long and unkempt, his beard wild and streaked with gray. The ranger uniform he wore was faded and torn, with patches sewn on in random places. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold. They were bright with an intelligence that had gone completely wrong. A predator's focus that saw everything in terms of hunter and prey. There you are, he said conversationally, not even looking at me. I was starting to think you'd run off and left the pretty little researcher to fend for herself. Let her go, Kane. Your problem is with the Park Service, not with innocent people. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw him smile. It was the kind of smile that belonged on a wolf, not a human being. My problem is with everyone who thinks they can just walk into my forest and take what they want. These woods don't belong to the Park Service. They don't belong to the tourists or the researchers or the weekend warriors. They belong to me. I've earned them with blood and sweat and 15 years of service. You were fired for good reason. I was fired because I understood something the bureaucrats didn't. This place isn't a nature preserve, it's not a tourist destination. It's a living, breathing ecosystem where only the strongest survive. And I'm the strongest thing in these woods. He took a step closer and I could see he was carrying something in his right hand. A knife, military style, with a serrated edge that gleamed in my flashlight beam. I've been watching you for months, Ranger Ash. Following your patrols, learning your patterns. You're soft, like all the new ones. You think this job is about helping people, about protecting the environment. You don't understand that it's about power, about being the apex predator in a world full of prey. I kept my weapon trained on him, but my hands were shaking. All my training, all my preparation had never covered anything like this. This wasn't a bear attack or a medical emergency or even a typical violent criminal. This was something else entirely. You're going to put down your gun, Kane continued. Because if you don't, I'm going to hurt little Winona here in ways that will make her scream loud enough to wake the dead. Don't listen to him, Winona said, her voice stronger than I'd expected. "He's going to kill us both anyway." Kane's smile widened. "Smart girl. Yes, you're both going to die. But how you die depends on how cooperative you are. Put down the gun and I'll make it quick. Keep pointing it at me and I'll take my time." I had a clear shot. 20 feet, good visibility despite the fog, steady platform. I could end this right now. But I'd never shot anyone before, had never even drawn my weapon in a real situation. My hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could hit him. "You're hesitating," Kane observed. "That's your problem, rookie. You think too much. You analyze. You second guess, you worry about the consequences. A real predator doesn't hesitate. A real predator acts on instinct." He moved faster than I would have thought possible, lunging to his right and disappearing into the fog. I fired twice, the muzzle flash lighting up the forest like lightning, but I knew I'd missed. "Winona, run!" I shouted. But she was already moving, stumbling away from the tree. I followed her, trying to keep my flashlight beam ahead of us while also watching for Kane. The fog seemed to be getting thicker and I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Then I heard Winona scream. I ran toward the sound and found her on the ground, Kane standing over her with the knife raised. Without thinking, I tackled him and we went down hard on the forest floor. The knife went flying and we rolled through the wet leaves and mud, each of us trying to get the upper hand. He was bigger than me, stronger, and he had 3 years of living rough in the wilderness. But I was younger, and I had 8 months of recent training. We were evenly matched until he got his hands around my throat. His grip was like iron, and I could feel my vision starting to tunnel. I clawed at his hands, tried to knee him in the groin, but he was too experienced, too focused. This wasn't his first time killing someone up close. "You should have stayed on the trail, rookie," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "Should have followed protocol. Should have called for backup, but you had to play hero, didn't you? Had to prove yourself." My vision was going dark around the edges, and I could feel my strength ebbing. But then I heard something that gave me hope. A gunshot, close by, maybe 100 yards away. Kane heard it too, and his grip loosened slightly. "Backup?" he asked, almost to himself. I took advantage of his distraction to knee him in the stomach, hard. He doubled over, gasping, and I rolled away from him. My throat felt like it was on fire and I could barely breathe, but I was alive. "Search and rescue," a voice called out through the fog. "Ranger Ash, are you out there?" It was Chief Ranger Martinez, and he sounded like he had a team with him. I tried to call out, but my throat was too damaged to make much sound. Kane got to his feet, looking around wildly. For the first time since this nightmare started, he looked uncertain. "This isn't over," he said, backing away into the fog. "I know these woods better than anyone. I'll find you again." And then he was gone, disappeared into the fog like a ghost. I helped Winona to her feet, and we made our way toward the voices. It took another 20 minutes, but we finally found the search team, 6 rangers with high-powered flashlights and radio equipment. "Jesus Christ, Ash," Martinez said when he saw us. "What the hell happened out here?" I told him everything while the team medic checked Winona for injuries. She was hypothermic and dehydrated, but otherwise stable. The rope burns around her wrists were real, and she had cuts and bruises that corroborated her story. "Ezra Kane," Martinez repeated when I finished. "Son of a bitch, we've been looking for him for 3 years. You knew he was still out here?" "We suspected. There have been too many disappearances, too many accidents that didn't quite add up. But we never had any proof, and the park is just too big to search effectively." They called in the FBI, the state police, and every available ranger. For 3 weeks, they combed through Olympic National Park looking for Kane. They found his camp hidden in a cave system that wasn't on any official maps. They found evidence of his victims, personal belongings, bones, things that made my blood run cold. But they never found Kane himself. The official report credited me with saving Winona Blackwood's life and identifying a serial killer who had been operating in the park for years. I was recommended for commendation, and Martinez talked about fast-tracking my promotion. But I knew the truth. I'd made rookie mistakes that had nearly gotten us both killed. I'd gone off trail without backup, lost radio contact, and let my need to prove myself override my training. If the search team hadn't found us when they did, we'd have been victims 18 and 19. Winona recovered physically, but she never came back to the park. She transferred to a different graduate program, one that focused on urban forestry. She sends me a card every Christmas thanking me for saving her life, but I know she's still having nightmares. I know because I'm still having them too. I stayed on as a ranger, but I never went out alone again. I followed every protocol, called for backup at the first sign of trouble, and never let my ego override my training. My colleagues respected me for what had happened, but I knew I'd gotten lucky. Dangerously, stupidly lucky. The worst part is that Kane is still out there. Every few months someone goes missing in the park. A day hiker who never returned. A photographer who was found dead at the bottom of a cliff. A researcher who simply vanished. The official explanations are always reasonable. Accidents, falls, exposure, animal attacks. But I know better. I know that somewhere in the vast wilderness of Olympic National Park, Ezra Kane is still hunting, still perfecting his technique, still proving that he's the apex predator in a world full of prey. And I know that someday he's going to come for me again, because in his twisted mind I'm the one who got away. The rookie ranger who survived when I should have died. The prey that escaped the predator. Sometimes, on foggy nights when I'm alone in my cabin, I think I hear footsteps outside. I think I see a figure in an old ranger uniform standing at the edge of the tree line, watching and waiting. And I remember what Kane told me in the forest that night. This isn't over. He was right. It never will be. Because the most dangerous predator in any wilderness isn't a bear or a cougar or a wolf. It's a human being who has decided that other humans are prey. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. The forest is full of dangers, cliffs and rivers and weather and wild animals, but none of them are as terrifying as the danger that walks upright, thinks and plans and remembers. The danger that looks like us, but has lost everything that makes us human. I learned that lesson in the fog-shrouded depths of Olympic National Park, where a missing person case became a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. Where I discovered that the most beautiful places on Earth can also be the most terrifying. And where I learned that sometimes the monsters are real. My name is Thorne Ashworth and I am 26 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 months. This happened during the fall of 2022, when the missing person case of Tobias Merrick turned into something that still haunts me. I was still new to the job, only 8 months in, when the call came through dispatch at 3:47 p.m. on October 15th. The autumn darkness was already creeping through the towering Douglas firs, and I could smell the damp earth and decomposing leaves that always made the park feel alive, yet somehow ominous during these shorter days. Ashworth, we've got a missing person report. Supervisor Hayes crackled through my radio. Wildlife photographer last seen yesterday morning near the Elwha River Trail. Family's been calling all day. I grabbed my notebook, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness in my stomach. This was only my third missing person case, and the first two had been straightforward. Lost hikers who'd wandered off marked trails and were found within hours. But something about Hayes's tone made my mouth go dry. Copy that. Details? Tobias Merrick, 34, professional photographer from Seattle, was documenting elk migration patterns for National Geographic. His editor expected photos by yesterday evening. Vehicles still in the Elwha Trailhead parking lot. I felt that familiar surge of determination mixed with anxiety. This was my chance to prove I belonged here, that 8 months of training and textbook knowledge could handle a real emergency. The veteran rangers like Martinez and O'Brien made it look effortless, but I knew they watched my every move, waiting for me to screw up. I'll head out now, I said, checking my equipment belt. Radio, GPS, first aid kit, flashlight, emergency blanket, and my sidearm. Standard search protocol. ETA 20 minutes. The drive to the Elwha Trailhead wound through sections of forest that seemed to grow darker by the minute. October in the Pacific Northwest meant daylight was a precious commodity, and I'd learned to hate how quickly the shadows swallowed everything after 5 p.m. My headlights cut through wisps of fog that clung to the undergrowth like ghostly fingers. At the trailhead I found Merrick's vehicle, a A silver Honda CR-V with Seattle plates. The windows were fogged over, and when I peered inside with my flashlight, I saw camera equipment scattered across the back seat. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard, growing mold. The metallic taste of unease crept into my mouth. I called it in. Hayes, vehicle confirmed. Lots of expensive camera gear inside. Looks like he left in a hurry. Any signs of struggle? I circled the car, playing my flashlight beam across the gravel. Negative, but... I paused, studying the ground. His footprints head toward the trail, but they're overlaid with someone else's. Larger boots, different tread pattern. Could be another hiker. Maybe. But the textbook training was already kicking in. Document everything. Trust your instincts. The larger boot prints were fresher, made after the morning dew had settled. Someone had been here recently. I shouldered my pack and headed down the Elwha Trail. The path was well maintained for the first mile, but I knew it branched off into more challenging terrain deeper in the forest. My flashlight beam danced across the wet leaves, and every few steps I stopped to examine the ground. Merrick's prints were there, along with the mysterious larger ones. After about 40 minutes of hiking, I found the first piece of evidence that made my blood run cold. A professional camera lens, expensive looking, sitting in the middle of the trail like someone had dropped it deliberately. The lens cap was missing, and the glass was spiderwebbed with cracks. But what disturbed me most was its placement, perfectly centered on the trail, as if positioned for someone to find. I photographed it with my phone before carefully bagging it. Hayes, I've got evidence. Damaged camera lens on the trail, approximately 1.2 miles from trailhead. Appears intentionally placed. The radio crackled with static, then Hayes' voice came through distorted. Copy. Breaking up. Stormfront. I tried again. Hayes, do you copy? Nothing but static. I checked my GPS, still showing signal, but the radio was dead. A chill that had nothing to do with the October air ran down my spine. I was alone out here, and the fog was getting thicker. Following protocol, I should have turned back. Called for backup. Waited for senior rangers. But that voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Martinez during training, whispered that real rangers didn't run at the first sign of trouble. A man's life might depend on my decisions. I pressed on, following the trail deeper into the forest. The boot prints continued, but now they seemed to be playing games with me. Sometimes they'd disappear for long stretches, then reappear on the opposite side of the trail. Other times they'd circle back on themselves as if the person had been deliberately trying to confuse any tracker. The smell hit me first. Something sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. I covered my nose with my sleeve and pushed through a curtain of low-hanging branches. In a small clearing about 50 yards off the main trail, I found what was left of an elk carcass. But this wasn't a natural death or even a typical predator kill. The animal had been butchered with precision, organs removed and arranged in a pattern that made my stomach lurch. And sitting propped against a tree, watching over this grotesque scene, was a professional camera. Tobias Merrick's camera. I approached carefully, my hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. The camera was undamaged, still switched on, the LCD screen glowing eerily in the gathering darkness. I pressed the review button and began scrolling through the images. The first photos were normal. Beautiful shots of elk grazing in morning light, mist rising from the forest floor, the kind of images that would grace magazine covers. But as I scrolled forward, the images changed. The elk became agitated, running. Then came photos of human tracks, close-ups of boot prints, and finally a series of images that made my blood freeze. Photos of me, taken from a distance, but clearly showing me examining Merrick's car in the parking lot. Me starting down the trail. Me stopping to examine tracks. The timestamp showed they'd been taken less than an hour ago. Someone had been watching me since I arrived. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping the tree line. Nothing but shadows and fog. But the feeling of being observed was overwhelming, like insects crawling under my skin. My radio crackled with static, then a voice that wasn't Hayes. "You're not very good at this, are you, Ashworth?" The voice was calm, almost conversational, male, with the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years smoking. But what chilled me most was that he knew my name. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone who's been watching you fumble around out here like a lost child. 8 months on the job and you're still making rookie mistakes." I grabbed my radio. "Identify yourself. This is Ranger Ashworth requesting immediate backup." Laughter crackled through the static. "Backup? Your radio's been jammed for the last hour. GPS too if you haven't noticed. You're all alone out here with me." I checked my GPS. The screen showed no signal, just a blank map. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Where's Tobias Merrick?" "Closer than you think, much closer." A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, drawing my sidearm, but saw nothing except the impenetrable wall of fog and trees. When I looked back at the camera, it was gone. "Looking for this?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You really should pay more attention to your surroundings. That's Ranger basics, isn't it?" I backed toward the trail, my weapon raised, trying to watch all directions at once. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" The voice was moving, circling me. "I want to show you something about the wilderness you clearly don't understand yet. About what happens when the prey realizes it's being hunted. You're talking about Merrick." "I'm talking about you, Ashworth. Merrick was just the bait." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a trap. And I'd walked right into it. I ran. The forest floor was treacherous, slick with decomposing leaves that masked roots and rocks. My flashlight beam jumped wildly as I crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at my uniform. Behind me I could hear movement, not panicked like mine, but deliberate, patient. The sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going. My radio crackled again. "You can't outrun me, Ashworth. I know every inch of this forest. I helped map it." That voice. There was something familiar about it. Something that nagged at the edges of my memory from training sessions and briefings, but I couldn't place it through the haze of terror and adrenaline. I reached the main trail and turned toward the parking lot, but after only a few steps, I stopped. A tree had fallen across the path, blocking it completely. The cut was clean, deliberate. Someone had been planning this. "Smart choice," the voice said from the darkness. "The other direction would have been much worse." I had no choice but to head deeper into the forest, away from civilization, away from help. My breath came in short gasps that created little clouds in the cold air. The fog was so thick now that my flashlight beam barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. A new sound made me freeze. Human voices, distant but growing closer. Multiple voices calling out, "Thorne! Thorne, where are you?" It was Hayes's voice, and others I recognized. Martinez. O'Brien. The cavalry had arrived. I opened my mouth to shout back, but something stopped me. The voices were too clear, too close together, and they weren't using radio protocols. "Thorne, we're coming to get you." Real search teams would spread out, use radios, follow established patterns. They wouldn't cluster together shouting into the fog, and Hayes would never use my first name in a professional situation. The voices were fake, recorded or mimicked. I pressed myself against a large Douglas fir, trying to control my breathing. The bark was rough against my cheek, and I could smell the sharp scent of pine sap mixed with my own fear sweat. In the distance, the fake voices continued their charade, but I could tell they were moving away from me now. That's when I heard it, a real voice, weak and desperate, coming from somewhere to my left. "Help, please. Anyone." Tobias Merrick. It had to be. I crept through the undergrowth, following the voice. It led me to a steep ravine that dropped about 15 feet to a creek below. At the bottom, partially hidden by overhanging rocks, I could see a figure huddled against the far wall. "Merrick?" I called softly. The figure looked up, and I saw a face streaked with mud and blood. Thank God, I've been trapped down here for, I don't know how long. Days, maybe. I surveyed the ravine. It was narrow, maybe 8 feet across, with steep sides that would be difficult to climb. There were handholds carved into the rock on one side, too neat to be natural. "Are you injured?" "My leg. I think it's broken. And I'm so cold." Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. The carved handholds, the convenient placement of the victim, the fact that Merrick had supposedly been missing for less than 24 hours but claimed to have been trapped for days. But looking at his condition, hypothermia, obvious injuries, the desperation in his voice, I couldn't just leave him. I holstered my weapon and began climbing down. The handholds were positioned perfectly, as if designed for someone of my exact height and reach. Halfway down, I realized my mistake. The clicking sound came from above. I looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the fog, holding what looked like a rifle. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a tranquilizer gun. "Predictable," the voice said. "Just like the manual says, Rangers always prioritize civilian safety over their own security. Classic rookie mistake." I scrambled to finish the descent, but the dart hit me in the shoulder before I could reach the bottom. Fire spread through my veins and my limbs began to feel heavy and uncoordinated. "Don't worry," the voice continued as I collapsed beside the figure I'd thought was Merrick. "It's not lethal, just going to make you more cooperative." Through the growing haze, I could see that the person beside me wasn't Tobias Merrick at all. It was a mannequin, dressed in hiking clothes and positioned to look human from above. The voice had been coming from a small speaker hidden in its jacket. Boots thudded on the ravine floor as my captor climbed down. Through blurred vision, I saw him clearly for the first time. A man in his 40s, wearing surplus military gear and night vision goggles. He was tall, lean, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years outdoors. But it was his face that triggered the memory. Dalton Voss. I'd seen his photograph in the personnel files during training. Former park ranger, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for excessive force during arrests. There had been rumors about him, that he'd been living rough in the backcountry, avoiding civilization, nursing grudges against the service that had cast him out. "You recognize me," he said, noticing my expression. "Good. That'll make this more interesting." He zip-tied my hands behind my back, then dragged me to a sitting position against the ravine wall. The tranquilizer made everything feel distant and dreamlike, but the cold stone against my back was sharp and real. "Where's Tobias Merrick?" I managed to ask. Voss smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Oh, he's around. We'll get to him eventually. But first, I want to talk about you, Ashworth. 8 months on the job and you think you understand what it means to be a park ranger." He pulled out a military-style knife and began cleaning his fingernails with the tip. "You have no idea what this job really costs, what it takes out of you year after year. Dealing with entitled tourists, cleaning up after people who treat the wilderness like their personal playground, watching politicians cut budgets while demanding miracle results. So you decided to become a killer. I decided to become a teacher." His eyes were cold, reflecting the limited light like an animal's. Every ranger needs to understand that the greatest threat in any wilderness isn't bears or weather or getting lost. It's other people. And the sooner you learn that lesson, the better ranger you'll be. This is insane. Is it? How many missing persons cases get solved because the ranger assumed the best instead of the worst? How many people die because their rescuer wasn't paranoid enough, wasn't suspicious enough, wasn't ready for the possibility that someone might be hunting them? He stood and walked to the other side of the ravine, where I could now see various pieces of equipment arranged on a tarp. Radios, GPS units, night vision gear, weapons. He'd been planning this for a long time. "I've been watching you for weeks, Ashworth, following your patrols, learning your patterns. You're soft, trusting. You still believe people are basically good, that they'll do the right thing when it matters." He picked up a radio, my radio, I realized. "I've been monitoring ranger communications for months, learning protocols, frequencies, response times. Did you know that backup takes an average of 47 minutes to reach this location? And that's in good weather." The fog was getting thicker, and I could barely see the rim of the ravine above us. The temperature was dropping, and without my jacket, which Voss had removed while I was unconscious, I was starting to shiver uncontrollably. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand what it feels like to be hunted. To know that someone smarter, better trained, and more experienced is tracking you like an animal. I want you to feel the helplessness that comes with realizing your training is worthless against a human predator. He activated a small device that looked like a GPS unit. I've been jamming your communications and tracking equipment, but I'm going to give you a sporting chance. In 5 minutes, I'm going to cut your restraints and give you a 30-second head start. If you can make it back to the parking lot, you win. If I catch you, he didn't finish the sentence, but his smile said everything. What about Merrick? Oh, he's part of the game too. He's alive, but he won't be for long without medical attention. So you have a choice. Try to save yourself or try to save him. But I don't think you're good enough to do both. The knife sliced through my zip ties and feeling began to return to my hands. Voss stepped back, checking his watch. 30 seconds, starting now. I scrambled up the handholds, my hands still numb and clumsy. Behind me, I could hear Voss counting down. 25, 20, 15. I reached the top and ran, not toward the parking lot, but deeper into the forest. If Merrick was really out here somewhere, I had to find him. I couldn't live with myself if I ran away and left him to die. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see my own feet. Every step was a gamble. Roots, rocks, and holes waited to trip me up. But I knew Voss was behind me, and his night vision equipment gave him a huge advantage. I stopped running and tried to think tactically. Where would someone hide a prisoner in this terrain? Somewhere sheltered, but accessible. Somewhere they could monitor, but keep secure. The old ranger station, maybe, or one of the abandoned fire towers. My radio crackled suddenly. Having fun yet, Ashworth? I ignored it and kept moving, trying to remember my training. Stay calm, assess the situation, use available resources. But none of my training had prepared me for this, for a human predator who knew the park better than I did, who had military training and superior equipment. A sound to my left made me freeze. Groaning, weak but definitely human. I crept toward it, using trees for cover. Through the fog, I could see a structure, an old maintenance shed that wasn't on any current maps. Light flickered through cracks in the walls. I approached carefully, listening for signs of a trap. The groaning continued, accompanied by what sounded like labored breathing. At the side of the shed, I found a small window covered with plywood. Through a gap in the boards, I could see inside. Tobias Merrick was there, bound to a chair in the center of the room. He was conscious, but barely. His face was swollen, his clothes torn and bloody. But he was alive. The door was secured with a simple padlock, and I had bolt cutters in my emergency kit. But as I reached for them, I heard the snap of a twig behind me. Predictable again, Voss said. I knew you'd come for him. I spun around, but he was already on me. The tranquilizer gun fired again, but this time I was ready. I threw myself sideways, and the dart whistled past my ear. We went down together, grappling in the mud and wet leaves. He was stronger than me, with military training and years of experience. But I was younger, and desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. I managed to get my hands on his knife and slashed wildly, opening a gash across his forearm. He cursed and rolled away, giving me enough time to get back to my feet. Blood ran down his arm, but he was smiling. Now you're learning, he said. Fear makes you dangerous. Good. He circled me like a predator, the tranquilizer gun held ready. I backed toward the shed, keeping the knife between us. My radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Voss's voice. All units, this is Hayes. We have a ranger down situation. GPS shows Ashworth's last known position as Sector 7. All available personnel respond immediately. Real backup. Finally. Voss heard it too, and his expression darkened. Earlier than expected, but it doesn't matter. I can finish this before they get here. He raised the tranquilizer gun, but I was already moving. I threw myself at the shed door, smashing the padlock with the bolt cutters. The door swung open, and I dove inside as the dart hit the doorframe behind me. Merrick looked up at me with eyes that were alert despite his injuries. Ranger? I'm getting you out of here, I said, cutting his bonds. Can you walk? I think so. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on my shoulder. He's been planning this for weeks. Talked about teaching lessons, about showing rangers what real danger looks like. Outside, I could hear Voss moving around the shed, probably positioning himself for an ambush. But I could also hear something else. The distant sound of vehicles, multiple engines coming up the access road. "They're coming," I told Merrick. "We just have to survive a few more minutes." That's when the lights went out. Voss had cut the power to the shed, plunging us into absolute darkness. My flashlight was in my belt, but as I reached for it, I heard the distinctive sound of night vision equipment being activated. "Last lesson, Ashworth." Voss's voice came from somewhere near the door. "Never fight a predator on his terms." I pushed Merrick toward the back of the shed and felt along the wall for another exit. There, a second door, probably leading to a storage area. I kicked it open, and we stumbled through into what felt like a larger space. My flashlight beam revealed we were in a workshop area, filled with tools and equipment. And there, on a workbench, was all of Merrick's camera equipment, along with something else that made my blood run cold. Photos, dozens of them pinned to a board on the wall. Photos of park rangers, me, Martinez, O'Brien, Hayes, others I didn't recognize. Some were surveillance shots, others looked like they'd been taken with telephoto lenses from a distance. All of them were marked with red X's except for one. Mine. "He's been planning this for much longer than weeks," I whispered to Merrick. "He's been hunting rangers." "The missing persons cases," Merrick gasped. "Last year, the year before. Hikers who disappeared without a trace. He told me about them. Said he was cleaning up the park, removing people who didn't belong." The sound of engines was getting closer, but so was Voss. I could hear him moving through the shed, searching for us systematically. We were trapped. The workshop had only one exit, and it led back to the main room. That's when I saw it. A ventilation shaft near the ceiling, big enough for someone to crawl through. I helped Merrick climb onto the workbench, then followed him up. The shaft was tight, filled with dust and cobwebs, but it led outside. We emerged behind the shed just as the first search vehicle arrived. Flashlight beams swept the area, and I heard Hayes shouting orders. But Voss was still out there somewhere, and he still had the advantage of night vision and superior positioning. "Over here," I called out, supporting Merrick as we moved away from the shed. "Officer down. I need medical assistance." The response was immediate. Rangers converged on our position, and I felt a surge of relief as I saw Martinez and O'Brien among them. But even as they secured the area and called for medical backup, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe yet. "Where's the suspect?" Hayes demanded as medics attended to Merrick. "Still out there, armed with tranquilizers, night vision, extensive knowledge of the park. He's been living off-grid for months, maybe years." "Description?" "Dalton Voss," I said, and saw recognition flicker in Hayes' eyes. "Former ranger, discharged 3 years ago." Hayes grabbed his radio. "All units, be advised we have a hostile former ranger in the area. Consider him armed and extremely dangerous. Initiate full tactical response." But as the search expanded and more personnel arrived, I began to understand something that chilled me more than the October night. Voss wasn't trying to escape. He was still hunting. The first sign was when Martinez's radio went dead. Then O'Brien's. One by one, the search teams were losing communication, their equipment failing in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage. "He's jamming us," I told Hayes. "Same way he got me isolated. He knows all our procedures, our equipment, our response patterns." "Then we do this the old-fashioned way," Hayes said grimly. "Visual contact only. Stay in teams of 3. Stick to established protocols." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. How do you hunt someone who knows everything you're going to do before you do it? The answer came with a scream from the tree line. One of the newer rangers, Collins, had been snatched so quickly and quietly that his teammates didn't even see it happen. They found his equipment abandoned at the base of a massive cedar, his footprints leading off into the fog before disappearing entirely. "He's picking us off," Martinez said, his voice tight with controlled fear, "using our own search pattern against us." I looked at the assembled rangers, 12 of us, all armed, all trained, all experienced, but we were fighting someone who knew our every move, who had planned for this exact scenario. And the fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to mere feet. "We need to get everyone back to the vehicles," I said. "Regroup, call in specialized units." But Hayes shook his head. "2 Rangers are missing. We don't leave our own." It was the right decision, the Ranger decision. But it was also what Voss was counting on. The next hour was a nightmare of cat and mouse through the fog-shrouded forest. We moved in tight formation, trying to maintain visual contact while searching for Collins and covering our own retreat. But Voss was everywhere and nowhere, striking when we least expected it. Rodriguez disappeared next, vanishing from the middle of our formation without a sound. Then Williams, who was there one moment and gone the next, leaving only his radio crackling with static. "Fall back to the vehicles," Hayes ordered. But it was too late. When we reached the access road, we found our transportation disabled, tires slashed, electrical systems fried, radios destroyed. We were trapped in the forest with a predator who knew the terrain better than we did. "Perimeter defense," Hayes commanded. "Back to back, overlapping fields of fire. If he wants us, he'll have to come through the open." But Voss was too smart for that. Instead, he began talking to us. 12 Rangers." His voice came from speakers hidden throughout the forest. "I've been planning for this moment for 3 years. Ever since you people cast me out, destroyed my career, took away everything I worked for." "You were discharged for excessive force," Hayes called back. "You brought it on yourself. I was protecting the park, keeping people safe from the real dangers out there, but you couldn't see past your precious protocols and procedures." A branch snapped somewhere in the fog, and we all turned toward the sound. But it was just a distraction. The real attack came from behind us. The tranquilizer dart hit Martinez in the neck and he went down hard. O'Brien spun around, firing wildly into the fog, but hit nothing. By the time we reached Martinez, he was unconscious and there was a note pinned to his jacket. 9 left, it read. "The lesson continues." That's when I realized what Voss was really doing. This wasn't about revenge or even about hunting. It was about proving a point. That all our training, all our protocols, all our confidence in our abilities was worthless against a human predator who refused to play by the rules. He was teaching us the same lesson he'd tried to teach me, that the greatest threat in any wilderness was another human being, and he was proving it by systematically dismantling our response. "We need to split up," I said to Hayes. "He's picking us off because we're clustered together. If we scatter, he can't track all of us." That goes against everything we've been taught. Everything we've been taught is what got us into this situation. Hayes looked at the remaining Rangers, 6 of us plus Merrick, who was injured but mobile. The fog was so thick now that we could barely see each other, even standing in a tight circle. "You're right," he said finally. "But we stay in pairs, and we use non-standard routes back to the highway." We paired off, Hayes with O'Brien, Reynolds with Jackson, and me with the injured Merrick. The plan was to move in different directions, then converge on the main road where we could signal for help. It was a good plan. It might have worked against a normal adversary. But Voss had been listening to our radio traffic all night. He knew our plan before we did. Merrick and I made it about half a mile before we walked into his trap. It was subtle, a tripwire that activated a small explosive device. Not enough to kill, but enough to disorient us and announce our position. We found ourselves in a clearing I didn't recognize, surrounded by trees that seemed to move and shift in the fog, and there, waiting for us, was Voss. "The photographer and the rookie," he said, emerging from the shadows with his rifle ready. "How poetic." "It's over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The other teams will have heard the explosion. They'll be here soon." "Will they? Let's see." He activated a device on his belt, and suddenly the night was filled with the sound of explosions, small charges going off throughout the forest. In the distance, I could hear shouts and gunfire as the other teams responded to multiple threats. "Diversion charges," Voss explained. "While they're chasing shadows, I finish what I started." He raised his rifle, and I knew I was about to die. But then Merrick did something unexpected. Despite his injuries, he threw himself at Voss, tackling him around the waist and sending them both crashing to the ground. "Run!" he shouted at me. "Get help!" I ran, but not away from the fight. I circled around using the fog for cover and came up behind Voss as he struggled with Merrick. The photographer was brave but outmatched, and Voss was methodically beating him unconscious. I hit Voss with a fallen branch, a solid blow to the back of his head that sent him sprawling. He rolled away and came up with his knife, blood streaming from his scalp. "You're learning," he said, and there was something like approval in his voice. Fear, desperation, violence. These are the tools that matter in the real world. We circled each other in the fog, predator and prey, but I was no longer sure who was which. The knife glinted in the limited light, and I could see my own death in his eyes. That's when the shot rang out. Voss jerked, looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then collapsed. Behind him, Hayes emerged from the fog, his service weapon still raised. "Backup's here," he said, his voice shaking. "Real backup. Forest Service, State Police, FBI. They'll find the others." And they did. Over the next 3 hours, as the fog finally began to lift, we found Martinez and the others, unconscious but alive, imprisoned in various locations throughout the forest. Voss had been planning to make his lesson last for days, slowly breaking down our confidence and capabilities. But it was over. We'd survived. Later, as the sun rose over Olympic National Park and the last of the fog burned away, I stood beside the ambulance where they were loading Voss's body. He'd died during transport, never regaining consciousness after Hayes shot him. "You did good out there," Hayes said, joining me. "Showed real courage." I looked at him, this veteran ranger who'd saved my life, and realized something had changed in me during the night. The textbook knowledge was still there, but it was tempered now by a harder understanding of what the wilderness really contained. "He was right about one thing," I said. "The greatest threat out here isn't bears or weather. It's people. People who understand that the wilderness is just another hunting ground." Hayes nodded. "That's a lesson every ranger learns eventually. You just learned it sooner than most." As we drove away from the forest, I found myself looking back at the trees, wondering how many other predators were out there, waiting for the right moment to teach their own lessons. The wilderness I'd thought I understood had revealed itself to be far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But I was still alive, still a ranger. And now I knew what to watch for. The human predators who walk among us, wearing friendly faces and carrying dark intentions. They're out there, in every wilderness, every park, every place where people go to find peace and beauty. And they're hunting. 3 months later, I was promoted to senior ranger. They said it was because of my performance during the Voss incident, but I knew better. They needed someone who understood the real dangers out there, someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, when I'm out on patrol in the early morning hours, I still hear his voice in the wind. The greatest threat in any wilderness is another human being. He was right. And that knowledge will never leave me. Because somewhere out there, in the fog-shrouded forests and shadow-filled valleys, there are others like Dalton Voss. Others who see the wilderness not as a place of beauty and peace, but as a hunting ground. And they're waiting for the next rookie ranger to stumble into their trap. The thought keeps me awake at night, but it also keeps me sharp, keeps me ready, because now I know the truth about what lurks in the wilderness, and I'm watching for them. 6 months after the Voss incident, I was assigned to train new rangers. Part of my job was to tell them about the case, to make sure they understood the real dangers they might face. But I always left out one detail, something that still haunts me, something that makes me check my locks twice every night. When the FBI processed Voss's equipment, they found something troubling in his communications gear. Radio intercepts, coded messages, GPS coordinates shared with unknown parties. He wasn't working alone. Somewhere out there, in the vast network of American national parks and forests, there are others. A loose confederation of predators who share information, techniques, and hunting grounds. They call themselves the Wardens, self-appointed guardians who've decided that the wilderness needs to be cleansed of the weak and unworthy. The FBI has been tracking them for years, but they're smart, careful, and they know the terrain better than anyone. They recruit from discharged military personnel, disgraced law enforcement officers, and survivalists who've gone too far off the grid. They see themselves as the true protectors of the wild places, and they're willing to kill to prove it. I've seen their handiwork twice since the Voss incident. Missing hikers found in positions that suggested ritual killing, equipment failures that were too convenient to be accidental, radio chatter in codes that match patterns from Voss's gear. They're still out there, still hunting, and they know who I am. Last week, I found something in my mailbox that made my blood run cold. A photograph of me, taken with a telephoto lens from somewhere in the forest. On the back, someone had written a single word in block letters: soon. I showed it to Hayes, to the FBI agents who've been working the case. They've increased security, changed my patrol routes, assigned me a partner for all wilderness assignments. But we all know the truth. If they want me, they'll eventually get me. The wilderness is too vast, too wild, too full of places where a person can disappear without a trace. But I'm not the same rookie ranger who stumbled into Voss's trap 8 months ago. I've learned his lessons, and I've added some of my own. I carry extra equipment now, maintain constant radio contact, and I never ever trust a situation that seems too convenient. Most importantly, I've learned to think like a predator, to see the forest not as a place of peace and beauty, but as a hunting ground where the strongest and smartest survive. Because that's what the wilderness really is, a place where the old rules still apply, where civilization is just a thin veneer over the brutal reality of predator and prey. Dalton Voss taught me that lesson in the most visceral way possible, and now as I train new rangers and patrol the same forests where he hunted, I make sure they understand it too. The wilderness is beautiful, it's peaceful, it's healing, but it's also where monsters go to hunt. And they're always watching, always waiting, always ready to teach the next lesson to anyone foolish enough to think they're safe in the wild. My name is Thorne Ashworth, and I survived my first encounter with a human predator in the Olympic National Park. But I know it won't be my last. Because somewhere out there, in the fog-shrouded forests and shadow-filled valleys, the wardens are still operating, still hunting, still teaching their brutal lessons to anyone who dares to enter their domain. And they haven't forgotten about me. The wilderness remembers everything. Every footstep, every breath, every drop of blood spilled on its ancient soil. And in that vast, patient memory, my name is written in letters of fire. I'm marked now, marked as prey that fought back, as a lesson that needs to be finished. But I'm ready for them. I have to be. Because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The hunt never really ends in the wilderness. It only pauses between kills. And my turn is coming.